So in these conversations, I weave in a comment that I told you about so you can then react to. So I've framed this UTOKing with Gregg podcast, at least for the first several, 15 or 20 conversations, at least to riff off of the idea that we're in search of a coherent naturalistic ontology that can revitalize the human soul and spirit in the 21st century. So
okay, I'm not big on the revitalization, but I could do the destruction part.
Okay, yeah,
of the previous failed alternative, and you can do the construction part of the new alternative because you are a scientist. I mean, you wouldn't be a scientist unless it said that the revitalization is not a philosophical claim; it's a scientific ambition. I highly respect it. So when it comes to psychology, it started good. It started well. It started as a natural science. And that's why I love that you talk about the animal mind and start there. Right. Okay. It also gives you a lot of friends among people who hate people but love dogs.
That's true.
It's good for your finances too. But okay, let's start there. So building from that, psychology lost it when psychology became a science in the service of the government. Because then it became the repair shop.
And then it became
of the modern economy. So any worker who couldn't work any longer in the factory, or even more so, any worker who was a white collar worker could work any longer in the office. They were sent off to a doctor for medical examination, and the doctor said, well, I can't find anything with you. And then they were sent off to the shrinks of the world.
That's right.
And psychology became the department of service to the government in fixing people. Now, that's not a bad idea to fix people. They said, no, not necessarily, but the overall goal here was just to fix people back into a system where they could be a cog in the system. And in psychoanalysis, why psychoanalysis became a different discipline and took on an artistic route after Freud's failed ambitions of becoming a scientist, was the psychoanalysis decided then to say, okay, psychoanalysis became more a monasterial activity, like you would walk outside of all the, I'm going to turn on the light here just for a second. So bear with me.
Please.
So
go.
Yeah, I'm not disappearing in the camera.
Yep, that makes sense.
Maybe I'm too dark now, I don't know. That's all right.
Your voice sounds good.
We can go back there. So psychology became a science that was sort of domesticated and put into the service in the academic world to governments and eventually to large corporations.
Totally.
And we went towards a society with 100% therapy. And we're going towards society with 100% addictions. So we're all becoming addicted, and we're all kind of psychologically sick one way or the other, or pathological, whatever. Well, we always were. But psychoanalysis knew that from day one. But what psychoanalysis did was to say, okay, we're not a science. We failed at becoming a science. We can leave it to psychology and to psychiatry, which is a social and a natural science, undeniably so. And then psychoanalysis can instead become an art form. And that revolution starts with Jacques Lacan. And therefore, psychoanalysis is allied with philosophy. That's why I do psychoanalysis, whereas you do psychology. Now, the one great thing with psychoanalysis after that, from the 1950s forward, is that it's become the place where philosophy could be conducted. Because as a psychoanalyst, I cannot be aligned with the government because I must be allowed to open my analysis on my patient, to be completely critical of the corporation they work for, to be completely critical of the government of the country where they live, or completely critical of everything. Because that's why critical studies starts with psychoanalysis, the good one. Okay, so that's why psychoanalysis was kind of this minoritarian, smaller movement that worked in the world of art and philosophy. And these days, when you do psychoanalysis, you don't treat people if they're sick or have mental disorders. You send them off to a psychologist first, or even a psychiatrist, and say, no, you go and fix yourself mentally, because now these days, psychoanalysis is such a hard thing to go through that you must be like psychedelics. You must be absolutely healthy to go through this process, but you will certainly existentially find out who you are, what kind of society you live in, because that is the process you do in psychoanalysis. So psychoanalysis has then greatly enriched philosophy. That's why you have guys like me and Slavoj Žižek and Peter Sloterdijk, and even Jordan Peterson is moving towards, he's coming from clinical psychology and is more or less forced to become a philosopher, because you have to do these things. Now that's what philosophy is. But psychology needs to be reconquered. And that's why I love your project, because it needs to be taken back from the service of government and institutions to become, again, a natural science, the way it should be. But I think at the end of the day, your product has to even leave academia, because it has to go out and in the sort of digital monasteries that we're creating after the corona now, where people locate to the countryside, get some friends together, go into deep studies, and study things they really love to know more about and become experts on. I think that's where new psychology could actually prosper.
I think, in fact, I don't know if you know this, but it looks like I'm going to give up my clinical license precisely because I'm feeling more and more alienated from the institution. I'm more, I get socialized in American clinical psychology and a product of that in a particular way. And although I love it, there's a huge amount of work to be done in relationship to it. At the same time, it's corrupted by a particular ideological structure that needs to be critiqued. And we need to grow out of. And that's part of my own journey is growing out of that.
Yeah, that's exactly what you and I talk about, a paradigm shift all the time. And it involves the old paradigm as much as the new one. So what's happening with the old paradigm is that ideology sweeps everything. Yep. So ideology first took over politics. Politics was no longer that you picked the best guy where you lived and he run affairs for you. That was politics originally. That was the point. Let's take the best women and men we have in our community to let them run the community for us, right? That was politics. But then politics became completely ideological. And then the ideology came out of politics and now it's swept into academia. Yeah. And you cannot no longer work in America or Europe with clinical psychology without having all these political directives of what you must achieve. And they're all about ideology eating everything. It's like, so if you're not a psychologist who subscribes to a very specific ideology, you will sooner or later get deplatformed or canceled or thrown out. I mean, this is what's happening with academia. And you see the same thing with mass media. New York Times has become a propaganda machine. It's like, we used to be a newspaper that tried every morning to objectively report on the world outside of you. Yeah. No, what is CNN and Fox News? Two different TV channels that basically throw pie at each other all the time. And it's entertainment. To watch CNN today is a fucking reality TV show. It's like Kardashians, right? Yeah. With their own stars, with their own, pictures and their own fixed faces and their own fake smiles and their own stories. And they most of all regret that the villain Trump has left the show because the ratings fell when Trump left. I'm sure it's complete television. And the same thing, you see the same thing with old industry. This might be the nastiest tragedy of them all, is that old industry is now being hijacked by communication agencies and HR departments to tell them who they can employ and who they must not employ. And they go for skin colors when they decide who should do a certain job instead of who's the most merited person. It's completely hysterical. And of course, they will go down with it. This is not going to make industry stronger. This is not going to make mass media any more credible. This is not going to make politics any more reliable. It's certainly not going to make academia any more interesting if you're young and smart.
Yep.
We realize these are dying institutions. Yeah. And, Jordan Peterson and Joe Favarchi are dear friends. They're stars at the University of Toronto that might keep them there longer than any other academic institutions. But as far as I know right now in Europe, anybody, with a self-interest and a smart mind who used to be really precious for the academic institutions are moving out. They're going somewhere else, right? So what we're doing now instead, we're thinking of, so what could that be? And I think there's somewhere in between the spa and the retreat and the gym and the academic institution. Somewhere in between those things, you build something monastery-like, preferably in the countryside with a showroom in the city. We convince people that 4 months of this in your life could do a lot of good to you. Right. And that is where you need the world's best clinical psychologists to work 10 years from now.